Let's do the math. 7 men, 7 horses, 20 mules, 50 bullocks, each one weighing a ton. Guns, chains, scientific instruments, enough metal to build a locomotive. If you dropped an army like that into the middle of a city, you couldn't hide it. But in April 1848, a German scientist named Ludwig Leichhardt marched that army into the Australian interior, and the continent just swallowed them. They didn't die of thirst. If they had, we would have found 77 skeletons scattered across the dunes. They weren't massacred. If they were, we would have found the brass buttons, the belt buckles, the horseshoes. They simply ceased to exist. For 170 years, search parties have ridden into the Red Desert. They found trees marked with his initial. They found rumors of a white ghost living among the sand dunes. But they never found Ludwig. The Lost Explorer, Australia's greatest mystery. This isn't a story about survival. It's a story about the biggest magic trick in history. But to understand how an entire expedition can vanish from the face of the earth, we have to go back to where the obsession began. Sydney in 1842 smelled like fish guts and ambition. Every week, ships arrived from England, carrying men who thought they could tame a continent they didn't understand. Most of them died poor. Some died rich, but all of them underestimated the interior. The maps of Australia in 1842 were honest. The coastline was inked in careful detail, every harbor, every river mouth catalogued by British surveyors. But past the Blue Mountains, past the edge of sheep stations and wheat fields, the cartographers simply wrote, Terra Incognita, unknown land. His name was Friedrich Wilhelm Ludwig Leichhardt. Everyone called him Ludwig. He was born in Prussia in 1813, the son of a peat farmer. As a child, he was sickly, weak lungs, prone to fever. The village doctor told his mother he wouldn't survive to adulthood. But Ludwig didn't die. He grew up reading every book he could find: philosophy, botany, geology. By the time he was 20, he'd studied at universities in Berlin, Göttingen, and Paris. He could speak 5 languages. He could identify a plant species by the shape of its leaves in the dark. But Ludwig had a problem. He was brilliant and completely unemployable. He'd come to Australia in 1841 with no money, no job, and no plan. He survived by giving botany lectures to bored colonists and begging funds from wealthy landowners who found his German accent amusing. But what Ludwig wanted, what he needed, wasn't employment. It was immortality. He wanted to be the first man to cross the Australian continent from east to west. It was a suicide mission, and everyone knew it. The interior of Australia wasn't just unexplored, it was considered uninhabitable. Every expedition that had ventured more than 100 miles inland had either turned back or disappeared. The Aboriginals who lived there had survived for 60,000 years by understanding the rhythm of the land. Where to find water, when to move, how to read the sky. Ludwig had been in Australia for 8 months. In 1844, Ludwig assembled his first expedition. He convinced a handful of settlers to fund him. He hired 5 men, stockmen, convicts looking for redemption, a blacksmith, an Aboriginal guide named Charlie. He bought horses, mules, and enough supplies to last 6 months. His goal? Travel from Brisbane to the far northern coast, a distance of nearly 2,000 miles through unmapped wilderness. People thought he was insane. They were right. The first expedition took 14 months. They survived on wild game, native fruits, and desperation. They nearly drowned crossing flooded rivers. They nearly died of thirst in the scrub. Ludwig fell ill with fever so severe his men thought he was dead. but he crawled out of his sweat-soaked tent the next morning and ordered them to keep moving. In December 1845, they reached the coast. Ludwig Leichhardt became a hero overnight. The newspapers called him the Prince of Explorers. The Royal Geographical Society awarded him a medal. Wealthy colonists threw banquets in his honor. Women wrote him love letters. He was 32 years old and famous. But fame wasn't enough. He wanted more. In 1848, Ludwig announced his next expedition, the impossible one. He was going to cross Australia from east to west. And this time, he wasn't coming back. Mount Abundance was the end of the world. It sat 200 miles northwest of Brisbane, at the very edge of what Europeans called settlement. Past this cattle station, there were no roads, no towns, no telegraph lines, just red earth and spinifex grass stretching to a horizon that never changed. In March 1848, Ludwig Leichhardt arrived at Mount Abundance with a plan that made even the cattle drovers shake their heads. He was going to walk to Perth, 3,000 miles, across deserts that didn't appear on any map. The station owner told Ludwig he was a fool. Ludwig smiled and said, "Perhaps." He'd recruited 6 men for the journey. None of them were qualified. There was Classen, a German botanist like Ludwig, quiet, methodical. He kept a diary of every plant they encountered. There was Kelly, an Irishman with a crooked nose and scarred knuckles. He'd served time in Van Diemen's Land for theft. He could shoe a horse in 15 minutes. There was Bunce, an Aboriginal, tracker from the Brisbane area. He spoke 3 languages and could read the land like other men read books. There was Stuart, a Scottish surveyor. He played the harmonica at night and talked about the farm he'd buy when he returned. There was Hentig, another German. He was 19 years old and had never been more than 50 miles from Brisbane. He volunteered because he thought it would be an adventure. There was Humboldt, no relation to the famous explorer, but he told everyone he was. He lied about everything. But he was strong, and Ludwig needed strong men. And then there was Ludwig. The expedition required more than men. Ludwig had purchased an army of livestock, 50 bullocks, each weighing over a ton. They would carry the supplies and, if necessary, be slaughtered for food. 20 mules, hardy, stubborn, built for rough terrain. 7 horses, 1 for each man. 77 animals. Then there was the equipment. 6 rifles wrapped in oiled canvas, 200 pounds of ammunition, 50 pounds of flour in sealed tin containers, dried beef, salt, sugar, tea, iron chains for the bullocks, leather saddles, bridles, horseshoes and nails, scientific instruments, sextants, compasses, barometers, tools for measuring a world that had never been measured, axes, shovels, canvas tents, cooking pots, and Ludwig's journals, blank pages waiting to be filled with the names of rivers and mountains that had no names. If you gathered all of this, the men, the animals, the iron and leather and brass, and dropped it into the middle of London, you could not hide it. But Ludwig was not going to London. He was going into the blank space on the map. On the morning of April 3rd, 1848, Ludwig sat down at the station owner's desk and wrote a letter. It was addressed to a friend in Sydney. The final line read, "I am full of hope. If I do not return, remember that I attempted a great thing." He never wrote another letter. The station. The owner stood in the yard and watched them go. He later told a newspaper reporter that he knew, watching them disappear into the scrub, that he would never see any of them again. By mid-morning, they were out of sight, and somewhere beyond that horizon, The continent was waiting. They were never seen again. For the first 6 months, no one worried. Expeditions into the interior were supposed to take time. Ludwig's previous journey had lasted 14 months. Everyone expected this one to take longer. 3,000 miles through unmapped desert. Of course there would be no word. Of course there would be silence. Silence was normal. By December, the newspapers began asking questions. The Royal Geographical Society sent letters to every cattle station and settlement west of Brisbane. Had anyone seen the expedition? Had anyone heard gunshots, seen campfire smoke, found horse tracks? The answer was always the same: no. By 1850, the waiting turned to dread. The first official search party was organized in 1852, 4 years after Ludwig's departure. They were led by Augustus Gregory, an experienced surveyor who had mapped the North Coast. He was methodical, rational. He didn't believe in mysteries. He believed in evidence. Gregory's team searched for 6 months. They found nothing. No bones, no equipment, no graves. But they did find something strange: trees marked with the letter L. The carvings were fresh, or at least fresher than they should have been if made in 1848. Gregory documented the location and moved on. Over the next 3 decades, more trees were found, always in the deep interior, always marked with L. But trees can't speak, and letters aren't bodies. The theories began to multiply like flies on a carcass. Some said the expedition was massacred by Aboriginal tribes. But if that were true, where were the bodies? Where were the guns? Where were the 77 animal carcasses? Some said they died of thirst, but Ludwig had survived 14 months in the bush before. He knew how to find water. He had Aboriginal trackers with him. And even if they'd all died of thirst, where were the remains? 77 animals don't evaporate. Some said they were caught in a flash flood and swept into one of the great salt lakes, their bones buried under tons of dried mud. But no one could explain how an entire expedition, moving slowly with 77 animals, could be caught unaware by rising water. In 1865, the Royal Geographical Society officially declared Ludwig Leichhardt and his expedition lost. But lost is not the same as dead. There were rumors, stories told around campfires, passed from station to station, from tracker to drover to stockman. Some said there was a white man living with a tribe in the Simpson Desert, a man who'd forgotten how to speak English, a man who wore animal skins and carried a spear. A ghost. But no one ever found him, and the desert kept its secret. By the turn of the century, Ludwig Leichhardt had been gone for 58 years. Anyone who'd known him was dead. The men who'd searched for him were dead. Even the trees marked with L were beginning to rot and collapse, their secrets crumbling back into the earth. The mystery was becoming legend, and legends attract liars. In 1909, a cattleman named Joseph Scewthorpe rode into a station near the Queensland border and told the owner he'd found something in the bush. Something impossible. A gun, with Ludwig Leichhardt's name on it. Scewthorpe said he'd found it near a waterhole 200 miles west of the settled districts, lying in the dirt next to the rotted remains of a leather satchel, and inside the satchel, a diary. Ludwig's diary. The station owner asked Scewthorpe if he could read it. Scewthorpe closed the journal. He said he'd show it to the government, for a price. Word reached the colonial government in Sydney within a month. Officials wrote to Scewthorpe offering to examine the diary and gun. They offered a modest reward for genuine artifacts, £50. Scewthorpe refused. He wanted £500. The government said no. and Joseph Scewthorpe disappeared back into the interior. He never showed the diary to anyone again. For the next 40 years, people asked about the diary. Scewthorpe's family said he'd hidden it, buried it somewhere in the bush, said he was saving it for when the government came to their senses and paid what it was worth. But he never produced it. Joseph Scewthorpe died in 1952. He took the location of the diary to his grave. Treasure hunters still search for it. The Scewthorpe diary. The gun with the brass plate. Proof that Ludwig Leichhardt walked where Scewthorpe claimed he walked. But here's the question no one could answer. Was it real? The handwriting matched Ludwig's letters. Experts who saw Scewthorpe's photographs said it looked genuine. But photographs can be faked. Brass plates can be engraved by anyone with a hammer and chisel. And if the diary was real, if Scewthorpe really did find it near that waterhole, which waterhole? Australia has 10,000 waterholes. Scewthorpe never marked it on a map. So even if the diary existed, even if it was real, it's gone now. Rotted, buried, burned, scattered by wind. Lost, like everything else. The only thing Joseph Scewthorpe proved was this. Even the evidence of Ludwig's disappearance can disappear. The Simpson Desert is the fourth largest desert in Australia. It covers 70,000 square miles of parallel red dunes, some over 100 feet high. In summer, ground temperatures reach 150 degrees. In winter, it freezes at night. Nothing lives there that doesn't have to, and for over a century, people have claimed to see him there. The White Ghost. The first recorded sighting came in 1881. An Aboriginal stockman told a surveyor he'd seen a white man living alone in the dunes. Far beyond any cattle run, far beyond any water source a European would know. The surveyor asked, "How was he surviving?" The stockman shrugged. He said the man wasn't surviving. He was already dead. In Aboriginal oral tradition, there are stories of the Muldarbi, the spirits of men who die lost and alone in the desert, men who refuse to leave the place where they died. Between 1881 and 1940, there were 17 documented reports. A drover near Lake Eyre, 1892, saw a naked white man with a long beard crouching near a clay pan. When I rode toward him, he ran, impossibly fast. He disappeared over a dune, and when I reached the top, no tracks. A prospector near Birdsville, 1907. Woke to find a man standing outside my tent. White skin burned black by the sun. He stared at me but said nothing. I asked who he was. He turned and walked into the darkness. I followed his footprints at dawn. They led to a cliff face and stopped. No body. No explanation. A station owner near the Georgina River, 1919. My Aboriginal workers refuse to go near the western boundary. They say the German ghost walks there. I thought it was nonsense until I saw him myself. A skeletal white figure moving through the scrub at noon. I called out. He didn't respond. I blinked and he was gone. 17 reports. Different years, different locations, different witnesses, but all describing the same thing. A European man, starved, sun-damaged, living where no one should be able to live. But there's a problem with ghosts. They tend to appear to people who expect to see them. In 1936, a psychologist named Dr. Edmund Morris published a paper arguing that the white ghost was a myth propagated by isolation and heat exhaustion. Men alone in the desert for weeks at a time, he argued, were susceptible to hallucinations. They wanted to see Leichhardt because the story was famous. The mind filled in the blanks. Heat shimmer became a figure. A dead tree became a man. Guilt and loneliness became ghosts. It was a good theory, until Dr. Morris went into the desert himself. He spent 3 weeks mapping Aboriginal sites and recording oral histories. On the 19th day, Morris woke before dawn. Morris later wrote in his journal that he stood frozen for what felt like an hour, but was probably less than a minute. Then the sun broke the horizon. Morris ran to the spot. He found nothing. That night, Morris burned his research notes, never published his findings. When colleagues asked what he'd learned, he said, "Some questions don't want to be answered." The last reported sighting of the white ghost was in 1947. After that, silence. Either the ghost stopped appearing, or people stopped looking. In 1962, technology finally came for Ludwig Leichhardt. The Australian government authorized a comprehensive aerial survey of the interior using new reconnaissance technology. For 6 months, planes crisscrossed the Outback, photographing every square mile of territory where Leichhardt might have traveled. They were looking for anything metal. Rifles corrode, but they don't disappear. Brass buckles tarnish, but they remain. Horseshoes rust, but they endure. 77 animals carried iron chains and leather harnesses. If they'd died in one place, even scattered across a mile, modern photography would see it. Dark spots on red earth. Geometric patterns that nature doesn't make. The survey photographed 30,000 square miles. They found nothing. But that was 1962. Technology improved. In 1995, NASA's Landsat satellite system was turned toward Australia. The satellites could detect metal concentrations beneath the surface, old mines, buried equipment, even large metal objects under 6 feet of sand. They found 19th century mining equipment. They found a crashed airplane from World War II. They found a tractor abandoned in 1931. But 77 animals? Rifles, chains, scientific instruments? Nothing. In 2004, ground-penetrating radar was deployed. The radar could see 20 feet down through sand. It could detect disturbed earth, graves, burial sites, areas where large animals had decomposed. They surveyed the most likely routes based on the L tree locations. They found geological features. They found animal burrows. They found a 19th century glass bottle buried 8 feet down, probably dropped by an early explorer. But a glass bottle isn't 77 skeletons. The team leader, Dr. Sarah Chen, archaeologist from Melbourne, wrote in her field notes, "The absence is too perfect." Later, back in Melbourne, Dr. Chen presented her findings to the Royal Geographical Society. She delivered her conclusion calmly, professionally. But after the presentation, a journalist asked her, "Do you think they're still out there?" "I think the desert has them." In 2011, a private expedition tried DNA analysis. Bone decomposes, but DNA can survive in soil for hundreds of years. Even a single fragment, a tooth, a fingernail, would leave traces. The team analyzed 300 soil samples. They found Aboriginal DNA from populations dating back thousands of years. They found DNA from cattle that had passed through in the 1920s. They found DNA from a dingo. But 7 European men? Nothing. The expedition leader was interviewed by ABC News. The reporter asked, "How is it possible that we can sequence the DNA of Neanderthals from 40,000 years ago, but we can't find 7 men from 1848? "I don't know." Technology kept improving, but the mystery only deepened. 77 animals, 7 men, tons of metal, all of it gone. The machines found nothing, because maybe there was nothing left to find. When something vanishes, The human mind demands an explanation. Any explanation. For 170 years, people have tried to solve the Leichhardt mystery. They've constructed theories, gathered evidence, built arguments. But every theory has the same problem. There is no evidence. Theory number 1. The Massacre. The oldest theory, the simplest. In the 1850s, colonial newspapers claimed the expedition had been murdered by savages. It was a convenient story. The narrative went like this. Leichhardt's expedition encountered a hostile tribe. There was conflict. The Europeans were outnumbered. All 7 men were killed. The animals scattered or were taken. The bodies were... But when anthropologists actually spoke to Aboriginal communities in the region, they said no. Aboriginal oral history is precise. It remembers. When explorers died violently, like the Burke and Wills expedition, the Aboriginal communities knew. They knew where. They knew when. They could lead searchers to the bodies. But for Leichhardt, nothing. And even if there had been violence, even if all 7 men were killed, where are the guns? Where are the chains? Where are the 77 animal skeletons? Massacres leave evidence. This left nothing. Theory number 2. The flood. Some said the expedition was caught in a flash flood. The Australian interior is a desert, but when it rains, it drowns. Flash floods can kill without warning. They can sweep men and animals into salt lakes, vast, shallow depressions that fill with water and then evaporate, leaving behind a crust of white salt. The theory was elegant. A sudden storm. The expedition camping in a dry riverbed. The water comes at night. They're swept away. 77 animals. 7 men. All of it buried under tons of dried mud and salt. But there's a problem. Geologists have cored the major salt lakes. They can read the layers like tree rings. Each flood leaves a signature: organic material, disturbed sediment, debris. If 77 animals drowned in 1848, there would be a layer. Bones, leather, metal, all compressed together. They found nothing. And even if the expedition was swept into a lake, the L trees are nowhere near the lakes. Theory number 3. Starvation. Perhaps they simply ran out of food and water. Lost, delirious, dying one by one under the merciless sun. It's how Burke and Wills died. It's how dozens of other expeditions ended. But there's a mathematical problem with the starvation theory. Leichhardt had 50 bullocks. Even if half of them died from thirst or exhaustion, where are the skeletons? In the Australian Outback, bones last for centuries. The dry air mummifies. The lack of vegetation means no root systems to scatter remains. Animals that die in the desert stay in the desert. Satellite imaging can see large bone deposits from orbit. If the expedition died of starvation, their animals would still be there, scattered maybe, but visible. The darkest theory. What if the expedition didn't just starve? What if they turned on each other? It had happened before. It would happen again. Perhaps Leichhardt's men, starving and mad, began to kill and consume each other. Perhaps only 1 or 2 survived. Perhaps they walked away, carrying nothing, leaving nothing, trying to forget everything. It's the only theory that explains the absence. If they consumed each other completely, there would be nothing left to find. But even cannibalism doesn't answer the core question. What happened to the metal? What happened to the 77 animal skeletons? Cannibals consume flesh. They don't consume iron. Every theory has been tested. Every theory has failed. The massacre theory, no evidence. The flood theory, no geological signature. The starvation theory, no bones. The cannibalism theory, no metal. 170 years of theories, 170 years of failure. Maybe the desert doesn't give up its dead because it never took them at all. Maybe they're still out there. Here's a question no one asks. Why do we care? Ludwig Leichhardt has been dead for 170 years. Everyone who knew him is dead. Everyone who searched for him is dead. The expedition has no living relatives demanding closure, no modern descendants seeking inheritance, no criminal case requiring resolution. And yet people can't let it go. In 2019, a psychology professor at the University of Melbourne published a study. She wanted to understand why unsolved mysteries create anxiety. What she found was simple but profound. The human brain is a pattern recognition machine. It takes incomplete information and fills in the blanks. It needs to fill in the blanks. When a story has no ending, the brain treats it as a problem that must be solved. But what happens when the problem can't be solved? The subjects in the Melbourne study were shown unsolved cases for just 30 minutes. Even that brief exposure created measurable anxiety. Increased heart rate, elevated cortisol, sleep disruption. The brain kept running the problem in the background, trying to solve it, trying to make it make sense. Now imagine that anxiety stretched over decades, over lifetimes. Unsolved mysteries become inherited trauma. But there's something deeper happening. The Leichhardt mystery isn't just about Leichhardt anymore. It's become a mirror. When someone obsesses over Leichhardt's disappearance, they're not really asking, what happens to Ludwig? They're asking, could this happen to me? Could I vanish and leave no trace? Could I be forgotten so completely that even my bones dissolve? The mystery touches something primal, the fear of non-existence. Not death, we can understand death, but erasure. The terror of being forgotten so completely that you might as well have never existed. And yet, maybe that fear is what makes us human. Maybe the need to solve mysteries is really the need to prove that nothing can truly vanish, that every life leaves a mark, that every person matters, that even when the world swallows someone whole, someone, somewhere, will refuse to forget them. The Melbourne psychologist concluded her study with a single observation. Some questions make us more human by remaining unanswered. Maybe Ludwig Leichhardt's greatest achievement wasn't crossing Australia. Maybe it was creating a mystery so perfect, so complete, so impossible, that 170 years later, we're still trying to solve it. Still trying to prove that nothing can truly disappear. The internet changed everything. Before the internet, if you were obsessed with Leichhardt, you were alone. You could spend years researching in libraries, writing letters to universities, waiting months for responses. Your obsession was private. But in 2010, everything changed. Suddenly, there were thousands of people who cared, and they had tools the 1970s researcher couldn't imagine. Drones with high-resolution cameras, satellite imagery you can access from your bedroom, metal detectors that can sense objects 20 feet underground, and a global network of amateur researchers sharing data. In 2017, the breakthrough seemed to come. A user named @historicalcartographer had spent 3 years analyzing satellite imagery. He found something. A circular depression suggesting a campsite. Rectangular anomalies that might be collapsed tent frameworks or equipment caches. And, most compelling, what appeared to be a deliberate trench. Within 48 hours, 12 people had volunteered to mount an expedition. They drove 300 miles into the interior. They found the location. They set up ground-penetrating radar. They swept the area with metal detectors. They excavated the trench. They found a Coke can from the 1980s. The circular depression was natural erosion. The rectangular anomalies were geological features. The trench was a dry creek bed. But here's the thing about the internet. Failure doesn't end the search. It creates more searchers. Every failed expedition is analyzed, dissected, learned from. Every dead end spawns 3 new theories. In 2019, a History Channel documentary aired. 3 million people watched. Forum membership tripled overnight. And the theories got wilder. But among the noise, serious work continued. In 2023, the most sophisticated expedition yet was mounted. They had satellite-guided drones, soil chemistry analysis, AI-assisted pattern recognition scanning thousands of square miles. They searched for 6 months. They analyzed 2,000 square miles. They investigated 47 potential sites. They collected 500 soil samples. They found nothing. The lead archaeologist gave a press conference. She was asked if the mystery was unsolvable. Her answer, "I don't think it's unsolvable. I think it's designed not to be solved. The desert doesn't want to give him back." The press mocked her, but the forum understood, because they'd all felt it too. That same need that drove Ludwig Leichhardt into the desert was the same need that kept pulling people back. The mystery was no longer about finding Ludwig. It was about the search itself. The desert had created something perfect, a question that answers itself by never being answered. There's a question no one has asked. What does the land think? In 2022, a documentary filmmaker asked William about the Leichhardt mystery. The filmmaker asked, "Do you think Leichhardt is still out here somewhere?" William's answer, "The land took him back. That's not a mystery. That's how it works." You white fellas, you think the land is empty. You think it's dead. You think if something's not in a museum or a grave, it's lost. But country doesn't lose things. Country keeps things. Different. The interview was never broadcast because it challenged the entire premise. For Europeans, disappearance is a crime against logic. Something must have happened. Someone must know. The evidence must exist somewhere. But for Aboriginal Australians, the land has always been alive. It has memory. It has will. And when someone walks into the interior without that relationship, without understanding that you don't conquer the desert, you become part of it. William tells a story. It's not his people's story. The Wangkumara weren't the ones who encountered Leichhardt. But the story travels. Different nations tell it differently, but all the stories agree. The land took them, not as punishment, not as accident, as inevitability. There's a concept in Aboriginal law, kurdaicha. It's often translated as sorcery or spiritual retribution, but it's more complex than that. It's the idea that the land itself enforces its own laws. Perhaps the mystery isn't where did Leichhardt go? Perhaps the question is, why did we think he was ours to find? Australian national identity is built on explorers, the myth of the brave white man conquering the savage wilderness. But the Leichhardt mystery breaks that myth, because the land won. The explorer didn't conquer the continent consumed the explorer. And maybe that's the answer we can't accept. We want Ludwig Leichhardt to be findable because we need the universe to make sense. We need death to have evidence. We need absence to have remains. William's final words in the interview, "You still think finding means digging up bones. But we found him already. Every time the wind blows, every time the red dust rises, every time someone walks out there and feels something, watching, waiting, that's him. That's them. All of them. Not gone. Just country now. Stop trying to take him back. He doesn't want to go back. He's home. The land speaks. We just don't speak its language. 176 years. That's how long Ludwig Leichhardt has been gone. Long enough that everyone who knew him is dust. Long enough that the world has been transformed. Electricity, airplanes, internet, satellites, AI. Long enough that the mystery should have been solved. But it hasn't, and it won't. Because the Leichhardt mystery isn't really about Leichhardt anymore. It's about us. What does it say about humanity that we've spent nearly 2 centuries searching for 7 men who probably don't want to be found? Dr. Rebecca Morrison is 67 years old. She's spent 40 years researching Leichhardt. Her husband left her in 1993. Her daughter hasn't spoken to her in 5 years. But she has 17 notebooks filled with theories and a terminal cancer diagnosis. She told her doctor, "I just need to finish one more theory, then I can rest." But when you ask people like Rebecca Morrison why, they can never really explain it. Because he's out there, and someone has to find him. And if not me, then who? There are hundreds like her. People who have invested years, sometimes decades, into solving a mystery that might be unsolvable. Or maybe, more accurately, a mystery that's already been solved, just not in a language we're willing to speak. In 2023, a psychology researcher published a follow-up to the 2019 study we discussed in Chapter 8. She studied people who'd been obsessed with unsolved mysteries for more than a decade. Her conclusion was devastating. They don't actually want to solve it. They need it to remain unsolved. Because the searching has become who they are. If Rebecca Morrison found Ludwig's bones tomorrow, she would have to figure out who she is without the mystery. And maybe that's more frightening than the mystery itself. The 2025 expedition departs in 3 days. 12 volunteers, state-of-the-art equipment, a budget of $200,000, crowdfunded from believers around the world, and the quiet, unspoken knowledge among all of them. They probably won't find anything. But they'll search anyway, because that's what humans do. We search, even when we know the searching is the only answer we'll ever get. There's a place in the Simpson Desert where the sand is the color of dried blood. Ludwig Leichhardt walked here in 1848. Or maybe he didn't. Maybe he walked 200 miles west, maybe 300. Maybe he never left Mount Abundance. After 176 years, we still don't know. And maybe that's the point. You white fellas spend so much time asking where, but you never ask why. Why do you need to find him? Why do you need to dig him up? Why can't you let him be country? Why indeed? There's a theory, the final theory maybe. What if Ludwig Leichhardt didn't want to be found? What if walking into that desert and never coming back was exactly what he wanted? Chen kneels down, picks up a handful of red sand, and she says, "I'm sorry we disturbed you. Rest well." There will be other expeditions. There will always be people who need to know, who can't accept that some questions have no answers. But maybe that's what makes us human. Not the finding, the searching, and somewhere in the red earth, country keeps things, different. The desert remembers. Ludwig Wilhelm Friedrich Leichhardt, 1813 to 1848. 7 men, 77 animals. One mystery. Still searching, still unfound, still teaching us what it means to be human in a universe that doesn't promise answers.